Thus far in 3ds Max, we've been pretty much viewing our work in a wireframe in the front, top, left viewports. And we've been using the smooth in highlights in the orbit tool to move around our perspective view. Problem is if we wanted to move around it, we have a floor in the way or we have a ceiling in our way. And because we're working in a three-dimensional space that's going to have a ceiling, especially for our walkthrough, it's important that we learn how to use virtual cameras. Now, in a previous lesson, briefly talked about professional camera shooting techniques that can be used both in cinematography as well as 3D animation. And those techniques I do expect for you to use, but you're going to be using these cameras in 3ds Max to actually accomplish that. A very simple lesson here, if you go up to Create and you scroll down to the fourth icon, it says Cameras. When you select on Cameras, you pretty much have two options here, Target and Free. I'm going to show you both of them. We begin with Free, and pretty much when you select Free, I always go into my front or left viewport, because that's typically we look at things from the side. I click. Now what you see is a virtual camera out in space. What's important to realize is no matter how many virtual cameras you use, you will never see them in the rendering. So if I was to hit render right now, we would not see that camera. So feel free to throw as many cameras in as you want to get multiple views of a particular animation. However, the benefit of the camera is to see what the camera sees. When we get into animation, we'll be able to animate cameras. We cannot animate the perspective view. So if I wanted to scroll around the room like this, I can't animate that. There's no way to possibly do that. But if I want to animate the camera moving, I can do that, and that's going to be very important. So if anybody asks why use virtual cameras, that's why. So of course the benefit is to see what the camera sees. To do that, you have to come over to the perspective view, click the word perspective, and you'll see the word cameras. Now I only have one camera in my scene right now, but if I was to have multiple cameras, I could choose what camera I want. It's important when you're working with the modify panel and a camera that you can name the camera. So you could call this south view camera. That way you'd know what this camera is actually focusing on. So again, naming things makes it very helpful when you have a lot of objects in your scene. But to get back here, we'll hit the word perspective, cameras, and now actually I have to select off the camera and back on. If I go to perspective, cameras, you'll see that south view is now the camera. And that name will update as you make changes. So I hit south view and I get a big bright white. Well, that's because my camera is looking directly on my wall. But if I go into my top view and I move that over here to the corner of the room and I use my rotate tool, you'll see now that I can physically move across the scene on one axis. So this is a tremendous benefit. Now, when you look at the modify panel, you will notice that the default lens for a camera is 43.456. Well, we can change that. And because I'm in the modify mode, I can choose any of these stock lenses. 15 millimeters is a wide angle lens, where 200 millimeters is a telephoto zoom lens. So you choose what one you want. I do offer that the advice of not going too wide angle because, as you notice, these rooms look very distorted. 35 millimeter is a pretty decent shot. Most of your cameras are 35 millimeter. There are some other properties that we'll look at in a future lesson here, but truthfully, that is it on how to create a free camera. Now, the benefit of a free camera is that you can attach it to a given path, and we'll do that in a future lesson. But I can draw a line here that looks like I'm walking around and have the camera follow that line. I'm going to hit delete to get rid of that camera, and when you hit delete, your view automatically goes back to perspective view, the exact same camera you were looking at. The next camera I'd like to show you is its partner, the target camera. Now the target camera is a little bit more useful because it can do something that a real camera not necessarily can do. When you use a target camera, you click to place the camera, but you hold your left mouse and you drag to create what we call a target. And pretty much what you can do is move the camera by itself which will always focus on the target. You can also move the target by itself, where the camera will look where the target is, or you can click on the line between and move the camera and the target simultaneously. So there's a benefit there. Let me show you an example here. Move the camera over here, and I'm going to create a box out in the middle of my scene. Perhaps I want to focus on this box. I can take the target of my camera and put it on that box. Now, again, as a review, to make the camera, to make the perspective you see the camera, I have to click Perspective, Cameras, and select the camera. Now, I can take this camera, and no matter where I move it around the room, the target is always on that box. And this is a method that I'm going to encourage you to use for your robot. One of the animations I want you to do is to go in, link the target to your robot, and as your robot's moving and walking, you can move your animation around the scene so you can get a 360 view of the object. Now, same thing here. I could go ahead and put the camera in the corner and say that I want to do a pan left to right. Well, I can take and animate my target moving left to right, and that controls where that goes. Target cameras are extremely useful because you can link a target to a moving object, and the camera will center on that object no matter how fast or slow it moves. So a target camera and a free camera are the two methods of creating cameras. Both see the same thing. Target camera. If you want to modify a target camera, you must select just the camera, not the target, and hit Modify. That'll go back and give you the same exact settings that a free camera has. Fortunately, if you select the target in the Modify mode, you'll notice there are no options for that target. If you select on the line between the camera and the target, you also have no options to modify this. You have to select camera and camera only to make modifications to that camera. Now, also another benefit of using cameras is that you can animate the zoom. And again, we're not doing animation yet, but we will very shortly. You'll be able to animate the camera moving. You'll be able to make the target move. You'll be able to go ahead and change the different lenses over time so that you get the zoom and pans that we discussed in your video, the first video you watched on camera shooting techniques. Okay, so that is it for virtual cameras. You're going to move on to the next step in your lesson here. But pretty much what you're going to do with 3 projects is to place a virtual camera in the scene, change the view to see what the camera sees, and render out the photo from that view. At this point, your house, you want to put a ceiling. I know it looks black, but there actually is a ceiling there. Because I have no lighting in my scene, it shows up black, but if I was to go and put lighting in there, you would notice there's a ceiling now, and that's very important. That you do that for the next set of renderings. Okay? Email me if you have any questions, and your next video will be on using depth of field, which is a special modified property of a particular camera.